Imagine opening a ready-to-eat meal. You just eat it, right? You're probably completely unaware of this massive, invisible architecture of safety decisions operating in the background. But before that food ever reached your plate, someone had to identify exactly what could make it unsafe and how to stop that from happening. In the food industry, we call this architecture a HACCP system. Usually, if you ask to see a facility's system, someone proudly hands you this pristine, perfectly organized, audit-ready binder. But here is the secret. You can have every single hazard analyzed, every critical control point identified, and every form prepared, and still have a remarkably weak food safety system. Because here's the really dangerous question. What happens when the manual says one thing, but the operation on the factory floor does something completely different? We so often assume that because a risk is controlled on paper, it's controlled in reality. But a beautifully written document simply cannot compensate for weak execution. It's a massive divide we see every single day. You've got HACCP on paper, and then you've got HACCP in operation. That manual, it merely documents the control system. It literally isn't the system itself. The true HACCP system exists in what happens out there on the floor, especially when nobody from QA is watching. Does the process behave the exact same way at 2 a.m. on a Sunday as it does during an audit? It really boils down to this concept. The HACCP manual is the map. The operation is the terrain. And food safety fails the second we start confusing the map for the terrain. You can draw a perfectly safe route on a piece of paper, but if the actual road is washed out, the map isn't going to save you. So if a giant binder doesn't actually guarantee safe food, what makes HACCP work? We have to look below the surface to find the invisible mechanisms holding up all those visible parts of the plan. Think of it like an iceberg. Up top, you've got your plan, the hazard analysis, the critical limits, the monitoring. But look at what's holding it all up below the surface. Good hygiene practices, cleaning and sanitation, maintenance, pest control, supplier controls, allergen management, and employee training. Before HACCP can even get off the ground, it depends on this entire foundation of prerequisite programs already working in the background. The system quietly assumes people are washing their hands and equipment is actually clean. It's kind of wild when you think about it. The part everyone calls HACCP actually depends heavily on the stuff people barely even talk about. If a facility's basic hygiene and maintenance foundations are weak, that operation is going to spend an enormous amount of effort managing problems that really should have been prevented. Which naturally leads us to ask, what happens when those foundations are weak? Well, when those basic prerequisite programs fail, a HACCP plan gets completely overloaded. Instead of focusing on genuinely critical, science-based hazards, the system starts trying to treat every single hygiene or maintenance failure as a critical control point, or CCP. And here is the bottom line. A CCP is not a repair mechanism for weak GMP. Having way more CCPs doesn't magically make the food safer, and having fewer doesn't mean your system is better. The hazard analysis has to justify what is genuinely critical. When everything is labeled critical just because your basic hygiene is failing, the word critical loses all meaning on the floor. And let's be real, the factory floor is where the true test happens, not during a scheduled audit. The real test is pressure. What happens when doing the right thing becomes really inconvenient? Imagine it's Friday afternoon, production is delayed, dispatch is literally waiting on a batch, you're short-staffed, and stopping the line will cost thousands of dollars. Suddenly, an operator sees a borderline temperature reading. What do? This exposes a really hard truth about monitoring. Just because a form is completed does not mean control is confirmed. Monitoring isn't just mindlessly writing down a number. It's recognizing what that number means and actually acting on it. A perfectly filled out form doesn't make food safe if a failing reading was ignored just to keep the line moving. Think about the human element for a second. If an employee knows the temperature is wrong, but they feel completely unable or unsupported by management to stop production, is that still just a technical HACCP problem? Absolutely not. At that point, HACCP shifts from a technical issue to an issue of leadership, resources, incentives, and culture. That's why HACCP is essentially a management truth serum. It doesn't make a weak operation strong. It exposes exactly where the operation needs to be strong. A failure at a control point rarely stays isolated. It forces a business to prove what they actually value when they're under pressure. When you look at the famous 7 principles of Codex, don't just see them as rigid rules to memorize. They are a continuous chain of decisions. What could go wrong? Where is control absolutely essential? What's acceptable?
How will we know control is maintained? What happens when control is lost? How do we prove the system works? And can we actually demonstrate what happened? It's one continuous loop of prevention.
Because the moment that chain breaks, the consequence travels. A deviation might start on the floor as just one missed check, but it physically moves down the line, from the process to the product out into distribution, causing recalls or massive rework, and finally right to the consumer, shattering trust. Which brings us right back to you and me. As consumers, we rarely see HACCP working. We literally only see the product. We're buying trust without seeing the machinery behind it. And honestly, that's exactly how it should be. When a science-based food safety system works perfectly, its success is completely uneventful. We just eat our food safely. But behind that ordinary meal are dozens of operational decisions designed to make sure absolutely nothing extraordinary happens to us. HACCP isn't a manual, it's prevention, built right into the operation itself. And the strongest systems aren't the ones with the most paperwork, they're the ones where the paperwork actually reflects reality. I hope this explainer has you rethinking HACCP as a dynamic operating system, rather than just a dusty binder. So next time you look at a flawless HACCP manual, ask yourself, is this just a map, or does it actually survive the terrain? Thanks for joining me. Food Safety Bites. Food safety simplified.